My husband said, I don't want to hear about your problems anymore. I stopped telling him everything. He filed for divorce when he found out I had cancer for 6 months. We'd been married for 11 years when Derek slammed his briefcase on the kitchen counter and said the words that would change everything. I don't want to hear about your problems anymore, he said, his face red with frustration. Every day it's something new. The house, the bills, your job, your mother. I'm exhausted from listening to you complain. Just handle your own problems and stop dumping them on me. I stood there holding a soggy towel from the leaking washing machine, watching him grab a beer and disappear into his office. The lump in my breast that I'd noticed 2 weeks earlier suddenly felt heavier. I'd been planning to mention it that night, but he didn't want to hear about my problems anymore, so I wouldn't tell him. Dr. Patel's face grew serious during my examination 3 days later. She ordered a mammogram and biopsy for the following week, her professional tone not quite hiding her concern. The results came back while I was at work cleaning a patient's teeth, invasive ductal carcinoma. Stage 2. I scheduled the oncology appointment for the next afternoon, my voice remarkably steady as I wrote the time in my planner. That night at dinner, Derek complained about his incompetent coworker while I pushed pasta around my plate, the biopsy results folded in my purse. He didn't ask why I wasn't eating. He didn't notice my hands shaking when I reached for water. He'd made it clear he didn't want to hear about my problems, and cancer was definitely a problem. Dr. Reeves laid out my options with clinical efficiency. Lumpectomy followed by radiation or mastectomy. Chemotherapy would be necessary either way. When she asked who would be my support person during treatment, I hesitated before saying I'd figure something out. She looked concerned and said I really shouldn't go through this alone, but I assured her I'd be fine. I scheduled surgery for 6 weeks out, giving me time to arrange everything without Derek noticing. The thought felt surreal, but he'd been so clear about not wanting to be burdened. I started working extra hours, telling Derek I was saving for a vacation. In reality, I was building sick time and saving for medical bills. The first insurance statement showed $3,000 for imaging and biopsy alone. I opened a separate bank account using my maiden name and started funneling money there, whatever I could spare, without Derek noticing. My surgery was scheduled for a Friday at 6 a.m. I told Derek I was going to a dental conference and staying overnight at a coworker's apartment. He barely looked up from his laptop when I left Thursday evening, just mumbled something about getting his own dinner. I checked into the surgical center alone at 5:30 a.m., filling out forms while other patients sat with worried spouses. The nurse asked twice if anyone was coming to take me home. I lied and said my sister was parking. I came to in recovery hours later with a drainage tube under my surgical bra. The nurse said the procedure went well, clean margins. They kept me overnight for observation, which derailed my plan. I texted Derek saying the conference was running late. He responded 3 hours later with a thumbs-up emoji. I took an Uber home Saturday afternoon with prescriptions, drain care instructions, and a follow-up appointment. Derek was golfing. I hid the drainage bulb under my shirt and made it to our bedroom before the pain medication wore off completely. Pills went in my nightstand behind a book, hospital paperwork in my car, surgical equipment hidden in a box labeled winter clothes. When Derek got home at 6, I was on the couch pretending to read in a loose sweatshirt. How was the conference? He asked without looking up. Educational, I said. Over the next 2 weeks, I changed my own surgical dressings in the bathroom with the door locked, biting a washcloth when the pain got intense. Derek didn't notice when I stopped sleeping on my left side or started wearing exclusively loose, dark shirts. What he did notice was that I'd stopped complaining. The washing machine still leaked, and I just threw down towels. My car made a concerning noise, and I paid the $400 repair myself. When my mother called upset, I comforted her, but said nothing to Derek afterward. He actually commented one evening that I seemed less stressed, that it was nice not having constant negativity. The pathology showed 2 lymph nodes positive, meaning the cancer had spread. Dr. Reeves recommended 16 weeks of chemotherapy every other week, then 6 weeks of daily radiation. I sat in her office calculating how to hide this from Derek for 6 months. The chemo nurse Patricia kept asking about my support system. I kept insisting I'd be fine. My first infusion was Friday afternoon so I could recover over the weekend. I told Derek I was helping a coworker move. He didn't ask which one or offer to help. I drove myself to the cancer center and sat alone in the infusion chair while Patricia inserted the IV. The chemotherapy drugs were bright red, pushing through tubing into my veins. 4 hours later, I drove home feeling shaky and nauseous. Derek was watching football. I made it to the bathroom just in time to vomit. He knocked, asking if I was okay. Stomach bug? I called back. He went to his game without further comment. I spent the weekend in bed with a fake flu while Derek slept in the guest room to avoid catching it. My hair started falling out after the 3rd infusion. I woke to strands covering my pillow, clumps coming out in the shower. That afternoon, I went to a salon and asked them to shave it completely. I bought 2 wigs on the way home, one matching my natural color. The natural wig went on before Derek got home. He didn't notice any difference. Over 4 months, I perfected hiding cancer treatment. Crackers in my car for nausea. The right medications at the right times. Concealer 3 shades lighter for dark circles. Long sleeves for 4 bruises. My wig stayed on from when Derek woke until after he slept. I arranged work around infusions and predictable side effects. I parked in the far corner where I wouldn't run into anyone he knew. Medical bills mounted despite insurance. Each infusion cost thousands. I took out a personal loan using my maiden name, $30,000 in debt, while Derek remained focused on work and golf. My coworkers noticed I looked pale and was losing weight. Dr. Morrison pulled me aside, asking if everything was okay at home. I assured him I was fine, just stressed. But what could I say? That my husband didn't know I had cancer because he'd told me not to bother him with problems? The truth was too absurd. My mother called one evening, worried about how terrible I sounded. "You would tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" I hesitated too long. "Of course I would," I lied. After we hung up, I sat in my car in the dark and cried until I couldn't breathe. When I went inside, Derek asked why I was late. I said I'd stopped at the grocery store. He went back to television without questioning why I had no groceries. Chemotherapy ended in November. My last infusion felt like victory and surrender simultaneously. Patricia hugged me tight, whispering I was the bravest patient she'd met and she wished I hadn't done it alone. I drove home with discharge papers and a radiation schedule starting in 2 weeks. Radiation was harder to hide than chemo. 15 minutes daily, but treatments were cumulative. The skin on my chest turned bright red, then dark purple. It hurt to wear regular bras. Derek commented I'd really let myself go with sweatshirts and baggy clothes. "Maybe make an effort to dress nicer," he said. "You've been looking pretty frumpy." I looked at this man who had no idea his wife was being burned with radiation 5 days a week. "I'll try harder," I said, then carefully applied cream to my radiation burns before finding something that wouldn't rub my damaged skin. By week 3, I was so exhausted I could barely stay awake during lunch. I'd sit in my car with the seat reclined, setting an alarm for 20 minutes. I started going to bed at 8, claiming I was training for a 5K. Derek didn't question why someone training never actually went running. My last radiation treatment was December 19th. The team brought cupcakes and took pictures of me ringing the ceremonial bell. I was crying and laughing, surrounded by staff who'd become family. Then I dried my eyes, drove home, and made dinner like it was a normal day. Christmas came with Derek's family at our house. His mother kept saying I looked thin and tired. His sister pulled me aside, saying I should take better care of myself, that Derek needed a partner who could keep up. I smiled and agreed, then went to the bathroom to adjust my wig and take another pain pill for lingering radiation burns. The PET scan to check for remaining cancer required lying still for an hour. I scheduled it for Saturday morning, telling Derek I had yoga then brunch. He was golfing anyway. I lay in the machine thinking about surviving 6 months of cancer treatment without my husband knowing. How I'd managed surgery, chemo, and radiation alone. How I'd paid $30,000 from a secret account. How I'd worn a wig every day and hidden burns under careful clothing. How none of it would have been necessary if Derek had just let me tell him about problems. The results came back clear. No evidence of disease. Dr. Reeves was thrilled, explaining the aggressive treatment had worked. I would need hormone therapy for 5 years and scans every 6 months, but the cancer appeared gone. I sat in her office crying with relief, then drove to Target for laundry detergent like I'd told Derek. January brought a new problem. The personal loan payments were due and my secret account was running dry. Even with insurance, I was $30,000 in debt. I started taking more hours at work, saying I was saving for renovations. Derek was pleased I was being productive instead of complaining about being tired. The hormone therapy caused nausea and hot flashes that woke me at night, but I hid that too. Everything was always fine because Derek didn't want to hear about problems. My mother visited in February and took one look at me before asking what was wrong. We were at Starbucks when I finally broke, the whole story pouring out. The cancer diagnosis, surgery, 6 months of treatment, hiding it all, the debt, everything. My mother sat frozen, her face cycling through shock and horror. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He told me not to tell him about problems," I said. So I didn't. We sat for 3 hours while I showed her medical bills, treatment summaries, scan results on my phone. She kept shaking her head, unable to comprehend how Derek hadn't noticed his wife was dying. When Derek got home that evening, my mother was waiting. "We need to talk," she said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard. She told him everything while I sat silent. I watched Derek's face as he learned his wife had cancer 6 months ago, had surgery, 16 chemo rounds, 28 radiation treatments, that I'd driven myself to every appointment and sat alone in every infusion chair. His face went pale, then red. Then he stood and started yelling. "You're lying," he said. "This is manipulation to make me feel guilty." My mother showed him photos from the hospital, medical bills, my shaved head pictures, my wig on the bathroom counter. Derek stared at the evidence, mouth opening and closing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. I looked at this man who'd shared my bed while I fought for my life alone. "You told me not to," I said simply. "You said you didn't want to hear about my problems anymore." "That was different," he sputtered. "That was about the washing machine. Not this." "Was it?" I asked. "You didn't specify what problems you wanted to hear about. You just said you were exhausted from listening and I should handle my own problems. So I handled my own cancer." Derek tried to pull me into his arms, apologizing and crying. My mother stepped between us. "Don't touch her. You don't get to cry now." For 3 days, my mother stayed while Derek tried to process what I'd hidden. He wanted every detail, but I found I didn't want to tell him. Those 6 months belonged to me alone, my private battle he'd forfeited when he told me not to bother him. He kept saying it wasn't fair, that I should have told him anyway, that cancer was obviously different from broken appliances. But how was I supposed to know where the line was? He'd been so absolute about not wanting to hear my problems. I'd simply taken him at his word. My mother scheduled marriage counseling before she left. The beige office was filled with inspirational posters. Derek immediately launched into how hurt and betrayed he felt. The counselor, Dr. Gregory, listened before turning to me. How do you feel about all of this? I'd been carrying the weight alone so long the question almost broke me. Exhausted, I said. Angry. Relieved it's over. Scared it will come back. Alone even though my husband is sitting right here. I told him everything. How Derek had slowly stopped listening over years, dismissing concerns as complaints. How he'd exploded about not wanting to hear problems. How I'd taken him literally because I didn't know what else to do. How I'd sat through 16 infusions alone watching other patients with support while I pretended everything was fine. How I'd driven myself home from surgery and changed my own drains. How I'd worn a wig for 6 months and hidden radiation burns. How I'd gone $30,000 in debt keeping the secret. By the end, Derek was crying into his hands. Dr. Gregory looked at him seriously. You told your wife you didn't want to hear about her problems. She took you at your word. Now you're upset she didn't make an exception for cancer. Can you see the impossible position that put her in? But cancer is different, Derek insisted. Did I? I asked quietly. You were pretty clear you found me exhausting. Why would I think you wanted to hear about the most negative thing that ever happened to me? We left with homework. Derek was supposed to write down all the ways he'd been dismissive. I was supposed to consider whether I wanted to stay married. That night, I asked Derek to sleep in the guest room. I needed space. The next morning, Derek had been up all night writing. 8 pages covered the kitchen table. Instances where he'd ignored my concerns, dismissed my feelings, prioritized his comfort over my needs. I read through it slowly, coffee getting cold. Some I remembered vividly. Others I'd blocked out or accepted as normal. By the time I finished, I was crying. Not because it was revelatory, but because seeing it written made it impossible to deny the pattern. Derek had systematically taught me my problems didn't matter, that I was too much, too negative, too burdensome, that his peace mattered more than my needs. And I'd learned so well I'd hidden cancer from him. 3 months into counseling, Derek asked what would make me willing to work on the marriage. I want you to come to my 6-month scan, I said. I want you to sit in the waiting room like all those support people I watched while I was alone. I want you to understand one fraction of what this year was like. He agreed immediately, probably thinking it was easy. The day of my scan, I drove separately. Patricia saw us and came over to hug me, then noticed Derek. Is this your husband? Her face changed when she realized this was the man who hadn't known. Her professionalism held, but her eyes went cold. The check-in receptionist, the imaging tech, the phlebotomist who'd learned my difficult veins, they all knew I'd done this alone. They looked at Derek with barely concealed judgment. Derek sat in the waiting room 2 hours while I had blood drawn, met with Dr. Reeves, went for my scan. When I came out, he was pale and shaken. Everyone here hates me, he said. You are a monster, I said. Not meanly, just factually. You let your wife have cancer alone. The scan results took days, and those days were torture. Despite being cancer-free, every scan carried terror of recurrence. Derek watched me spiral with growing horror, finally understanding the reality I'd lived alone. When Dr. Reeves called with clear results, Derek cried with relief. I felt only tired. 4 months into counseling, Derek came home early and put his head in his hands. I can't live with the guilt, he said. Every time I look at you, I see what I did, how I failed. I keep thinking about you sitting alone in chemo while I was golfing or watching television, about you changing surgical drains yourself and hiding to throw up, about you wearing a wig to bed so I wouldn't notice, about you looking frumpy because I complained while you had radiation burns. He was ugly crying now. I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. But I need you to know I understand why you might never forgive me. Do you want a divorce? I asked. Do you? I don't know, I admitted. I'm still so angry, but I'm exhausted from carrying this alone. I don't know if I have energy to be angry and rebuild a marriage. What if we separated? He suggested. Not divorced, just separated. I'll move out. Give you space with no pressure, no timeline. It was the most considerate thing he'd suggested in years. Derek moved into a furnished apartment that weekend. The silence was initially peaceful, then lonely, then peaceful again. I had space to process without Derek's guilt filling the rooms. I started going to a cancer support group, finally sharing my story. When I got to hiding it from my husband, the room went silent. Then an older woman named Ruth spoke. I did something similar with my mother's dementia. My husband didn't want to deal with it, so I handled it alone until she died. We learned to carry what we're given, even when we shouldn't have to. Her validation cracked something open. I'd thought I was crazy for taking Derek's words literally, but Ruth and others understood the impossible position of being told you're too much. That sometimes taking someone at their word is the only self-protection left. Derek started his own therapy, not just couples counseling, but individual work. He'd send brief updates, not asking forgiveness, but showing he was trying. He joined a men's group on emotional availability. He read books about marriage. He was actually trying in a way he hadn't in years. 3 months into separation, I agreed to coffee. We met at a neutral cafe. Derek looked different, lighter despite obvious stress. We talked 2 hours, carefully, then openly. He told me about therapy breakthroughs, how he'd been emotionally checked out long before cancer, how he'd been coasting on early foundation without maintaining it, how he'd taken me for granted. I told him about the support group, about Ruth and others who'd carried impossible burdens, about learning to advocate for myself, to recognize when words and actions didn't match, about figuring out who I was outside being someone's wife. We left without resolving anything, but something had shifted. We started meeting weekly, then twice weekly. Sometimes walks and talks, sometimes movies in comfortable silence. Slowly, carefully, learning how to be two people who might possibly become partners again. 8 months into separation, I had a cancer scare, a suspicious spot requiring additional imaging. I texted Derek immediately when I got the call back. He respected my boundary about not coming in while making sure I knew he was available. The spot was scar tissue, nothing sinister. But the terror while waiting showed me something. I texted him right away, let him know I was scared, and he'd respected boundaries while being available. Communication, respect, emotional availability. The building blocks we'd lost and were slowly reconstructing. 10 months separated, Derek asked if we could try counseling again, as two people actively trying to reconcile. I agreed with conditions. Complete financial access, my name on everything, a post-nuptial agreement protecting me if we divorced, him at every cancer appointment for 5 years. I wanted things I'd never asked for, and I wanted them in writing. Derek agreed to everything. The post-nup gave me the house, my car, half his retirement, enough spousal support to maintain my lifestyle if we divorced. He signed without hesitation. We moved back in together that November, almost 2 years after diagnosis. It felt strange sharing space after 10 months apart. We'd both changed, grown, become different versions. The house felt different too, less like a cage and more like shared space we both maintained. Derek started cooking twice weekly, asking about my work, and really listening. He came to my support group once as a guest speaker, sharing what it was like to fail your partner during cancer. His brutal honesty made several people cry. One woman said she'd show her husband the recording to wake him up before it was too late. We still went to counseling weekly. Some sessions were productive conversations about rebuilding trust. Others were hard, both crying and angry about wounds that hadn't healed. Dr. Gregory kept reminding us healing wasn't linear. The work was exhausting, but necessary. My 2-year scan came back clear. Derek came to the appointment, sitting in the waiting room where he'd felt staff judgment. They were warmer now, seeing he showed up, but knowledge of what he'd missed hung in the air. Dr. Reeves said my prognosis was excellent. 3 more years of clear scans and I'd be considered cured. In the car afterward, Derek said, "Thank you for letting me be here." "It's not about letting you," I said. "It's about you showing up because you want to, not because I begged you to care." 5 years post-diagnosis, Dr. Reeves declared me officially cured. 5 years cancer-free with no recurrence. I could stop hormone therapy, reduce scan frequency, live without constant fear. Derek had come to every appointment for 5 years, sitting in waiting rooms and holding my hand through scans. He'd learned all my doctors' names. He'd taken notes and asked intelligent questions. He'd been present in ways he hadn't been when it mattered most. We celebrated at the restaurant from our first date. Over wine, Derek said, "I know I can never make up for what I didn't do. That first year is lost forever. But I'm grateful you gave me the chance to be here for the rest, to learn how to be a real partner." I looked at this man across the table, both familiar and foreign. We weren't the same people who'd married. We'd been broken down and rebuilt into something different, something maybe stronger for being destroyed first. Maybe we'd make it. Maybe we wouldn't. But now, when I had problems, I could tell him, and he would listen. 6 years after diagnosis, we started a scholarship fund for single women going through cancer treatment alone. We named it "No One Should Face This Alone." The first recipient cried receiving the check, saying it meant childcare during chemo. Derek volunteered at the cancer center doing administrative work and patient support. Patricia said she'd been skeptical but grew to respect his commitment. "He shows up," she said simply. "That's more than many partners do." 7 years after diagnosis, on the anniversary of my first chemo, Derek arranged to visit the cancer center and thank staff who'd helped me. He brought flowers for nurses, cards for doctors, cookies for admin. But first, he asked to speak to staff privately. I watched through the window as he addressed them. I couldn't hear words but saw people crying, saw him crying, saw serious faces. When he came out, Patricia pulled me aside. He apologized. For not being there, for failing you, for taking so long to understand. He asked if there was anything he could do to support other patients without support systems. It was a good apology. She paused. "He's trying really hard to be better." "I know," I said. "I see it every day." 8 years after diagnosis, we fostered a teenager named Kira, whose mother was going through cancer treatment alone. The social worker said Kira's mom couldn't handle treatment and parenting. We said yes immediately, both understanding what it meant to face cancer without support. Derek showed up to her school events, helped with homework, drove her to visit her mother in the hospital. 6 months later, Kira went home when her mother completed treatment. But she stayed in touch, texting occasionally and coming for dinner monthly. 10 years after diagnosis, we renewed vows again, not as apology but as celebration. 10 years cancer-free. 10 years of marriage after almost ending. 10 years of therapy and hard conversations and learning to be partners. My hair was fully silver now, something from chemo that never reversed. I'd stopped dyeing it, letting silver shine as evidence of survival. At the ceremony, my mother gave a toast about strength and surrounding yourself with people who show up. Derek's mother spoke about second chances and work required to deserve them. Dr. Reeves came and talked about witnessing one of the most remarkable survivals she'd seen, not just of cancer, but of a marriage that should have died. Dancing with Derek in our backyard, I thought about that day 11 years ago when he told me to stop bothering him with problems. How I'd taken him literally and hidden the biggest problem of my life. How that choice destroyed us and somehow, eventually, saved us both. We weren't the same people. The marriage now bore little resemblance to what we'd started with. Maybe that was okay. Maybe some things need complete destruction before proper rebuilding. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn how to love you better, Derek whispered. I didn't say you're welcome. Instead, I said, thank you for actually learning. That's what mattered. Not the failure, but what came after. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.